the chair of the sub-panel.
I'm Deputy Monfatelli, I'm the Vice Chair, and I've been co-opted effectively from the Economic Affairs panel.
I am panel member Deputy Max Andrews.
David Johnson, Consul of St Mary, member of this sub-panel.
Minister, would you like to introduce your team?
Well, it's really, I'm their team. So I'm Ian Gorst, here as the Assistant Minister for Treasury and Resources.
Elaine Miller, Minister for Treasury and Resources.
Cora O'Brien, Deputy Controller in Revenue Jersey.
And Jeremiah Cutter, Deputy Director for International Tax Policy.
And joining us all the way from London, I imagine?
All the way from London today, yeah. Tom Lefevre, I'm the Director of External Relations.
Okay, thank you. So we've got 2 hours. Normal rules in scrutiny panel meetings apply. The meeting is being recorded and will be available online, and there will be a transcript produced. Phones to silent, please, if possible. And I think with that, we can begin. Minister, we want to start with some general questions, and perhaps to draw a broad picture of where this has come from and where it's going. Could you explain how you understand the primary objectives of the proposition that you're bringing to the Assembly? That's P53, which introduces this Pillar 2 into Jersey's law. Could you explain what your primary objectives were in doing that and the approach that you took?
This is thank you, Chair. This is a process which has been ongoing for a number of years. We were reminiscing yesterday that actually the first announcement was made back in 2018, where the OECD made the announcement that it was going to undertake this review and piece of work to think about the taxation of digital companies and the how the global taxation really interacted, and whether it was appropriate for the way that companies traded in the modern world using technology. It, of course, came from some countries wishing to introduce a digital services tax, America not being happy with those digital service taxes and seeking to introduce trade barriers. And it was then really put on the plate of the OECD to think about how it could manage those issues. It started as a digital tax proposal. Some European member states said that they would like to put on a minimum global tax onto the table for the same discussions. And that really was the genesis. So we in Jersey have engaged with the OECD through this design process. There's been hundreds of hours of working party meetings and steering group meetings. Cora, who's just introduced herself, sits on behalf of Jersey on that steering group. I think that just shows how engaged we have been and how we can manage these international forums. It's taken views of all jurisdictions across the OECD and others. What's ended up is what's called a common approach rather than anything else. So that means that there's flexibility in how jurisdictions can implement their Pillar 2 framework. And I, for one, am extremely grateful for Cora and Jeremiah and all the work that they've undertaken at the OECD, which I think has given us in Jersey a real deep understanding of a positive implementation pathway. They've also done a lot of data analysis, and colleagues at Revenue Jersey, to understand those in-scope companies in Jersey, what they do, what profits are earned here, where they're headquartered, what group structures they've got. Of course, all of that sort of information is highly sensitive and confidential, but it's been critical in us arriving at the position that we have, and I know you've had lots of briefings by officials touching on some of those areas which are confidential but nevertheless important. And then we've had a lot of direct stakeholder engagement, both at officer level. They've done most of the heavy lifting, but also at ministerial level. The Minister and I have met with stakeholders here in Jersey, in London, and elsewhere around the world as well.
Can I push
So
you
what
on the
I'm trying to lead to
objectives?
is to get to the objectives.
Yeah.
So all of that work's been done. So the objective of the OECD was those objectives that I set out right at the start of answering that question. And the result of those objectives are what we've now got in the model rules. And our objective is in effect to give effect to those model rules here in Jersey in a way that means that we can maintain sovereignty, which is why we've gone for a domestic covered tax. We can remain flexible as this process unfolds, because we know that there is still some guidance which is being worked on, and only this last week there's been other guidance published. It also allows us, in the way that we have published the legislation and the approach that we've taken, to manage the bureaucracy and the processes, thereby giving us, I think, a competitive advantage. So high-level objective is to deliver the model rules, but in a way which is best for Jersey and also allows us to be flexible and competitive.
How does that fit in broad terms into Jersey's tax and economic policy objectives? Because we've had 0-10 for a long time, and that was a conscious decision, and now we're making a conscious decision to do something very different, introduce an entirely new tax rate, move some companies off 0-10 and put them into a new tax bracket. How does it feel like it challenges our traditional model or our economic strategy, or how does it fit, basically?
Well, if our tax strategy is basically low, broad, simple and fair, which it's been largely that for a number of years, then we see that 0-10 was premised on being tax neutral. So we always expected tax to be paid in the country where the capital was raised. We wouldn't add an extra layer of tax here in Jersey, and then where that money was invested, there is also obligations in those countries decided by those domestic countries. What's changed is not our approach in Jersey. What's changed is the international consensus at the OECD in delivering this common approach. And as we say, the reason why your question about strategic aim is important, that is what we are seeking to do. A common approach means that you do have this flexibility, as I've said. So one of the proposals under the OECD proposals that we are not introducing is the under-taxed profit rule. And the reason we're not introducing that is back to your point about what our economic model is, not adding any additional layer of tax in Jersey that we don't need to. And therefore we're saying, well, we're not going to add the under-taxed profit rule because that's not in line with our economic model. What slightly changed, of course, is that because of the way that the model rules are framed, in-scope global companies cannot avoid paying the tax. The question is, in the way the model rules are devised, where will they pay that tax? And the idea behind starting to look at this is that tax is paid where profits are made. Basically it's an extension of all of the base erosion and profit shifting work, which again we in Jersey have been involved in at the OECD for a long time. So we have not changed the lens through which we are looking at the business here in Jersey. We are recognising that this is an international change. We are following the model rules, which is why you see the piece of legislation incorporating the model rules into domestic legislation. But we are seeking to remain competitive for those in-scope companies, just in the same way that we always historically have. And really back to that point about these model rules are designed to ensure tax is taken, as I say, where profit rises, but they're also designed that whereby if that tax isn't taken in that jurisdiction, other jurisdictions can then take that tax, and in the way that the model rules are designed is that really would go up the chain. So it would be, we think, nonsensical for Jersey not to introduce it, but to introduce it in a way which is competitive.
Thank you. Can I take over?
Yeah.
I've got some questions that specifically arise from what you've said, and I think you almost have answered maybe some of the other questions later on. So thanks for that. Could you tell us about which companies are in scope, and then tell us what the exclusions are, the exemptions are from not just the threshold, but other types of company and entities that are not in scope, and why?
Well, you will have seen the legislation. The in-scope companies are those prescribed by the model rules. So in Jersey, that means there's about 1,400 in-scope companies. These are global companies with large 750 million euros turnover. And as I say, that they for us, that's 95% of companies in Jersey are not in scope. So we're talking a really small proportion of Jersey, and they are only also available in a different approach to the one we're taking. But there is flexibility within the OECD rules or commentary, which allow for the exclusion of insurance, investment entities and securitisation vehicles. And we, back to the point that the Chair just asked about our existing model, we have included those exemptions within our legislation.
Thank you. Could I move on, and you've touched on it already, but to talk about the broader objectives and maybe the underlying philosophy and intent of the global move towards Pillar 2. How do you see that, and what do you see as Jersey's role in achieving those goals?
Well, it's I suppose a two-part answer to that, really. We have, as I've said, we do have this unique position at the OECD in that in the global forum and the inclusive framework, we do have our own seat, even though we are a sub-sovereign, because we are a competent authority in our own right, and that authority rests with us. And so I suppose the most important role that we play is in helping to frame those rules and being party to those conversations, so that there is a good understanding of what centres like Jersey bring to the financial ecosystem and global flows. That's one bit of the answer. The other is that we in Jersey's government for a long time have sought to implement relevant international standards. Now, even though in this instance it isn't a minimum standard, So we could have said we are not going to implement it because it's not a minimum standard in theory.
Yeah.
But in practice, I don't believe that that was or is an option that is open to us, nor should be open to us, and therefore we're playing our part in delivering this new standard by implementing it.
So I get that. So apart from just doing this because we have to, and we would look bad if we didn't. In terms of the public good that is motivating this, could I just check if we're all on the same page? So you mentioned about digitisation of the economy, I think, and that's one of the starting points. But do you accept that another underlying aim of this is to make sure that there isn't what Google, for example, might say is a race to the bottom in terms of tax rates, and to make sure that all big companies, wherever they're based, are actually contributing to public services in those areas? Is that also...
Well, that's obviously a highly political question and not directly correlated with the legislation before us. I have made the decision, and ministers support this decision.
Well, can I re-ask?
I'll get to answer your question.
Can I re-ask it though? Because it's not my words. It's not political. This is from the OECD. So they talk about, their website talks about GLOBE, and it says that global anti-base erosion rules are a key component to make sure that large multinational enterprises pay a minimum level of tax on income. So where they operate. So that's just what the OECD is saying. Is that something which you think is correct and you're willing to subscribe to as a minister?
We are implementing this as part of the global consensus in the way that I have said on more than one occasion, and that's why we've got the legislation before us. In doing so, we are holding in tension the strong belief that taxation should be a sovereign issue, and I think we strongly continue to believe that in Jersey. I strongly continue to believe it, and there was a lot of conversation and argument about if we were going to introduce a minimum global rate. There were two bits of arguments about it. We take the position going into this conversation that taxation should be a sovereign matter, not a matter divested to multinational bodies. But at that multinational body, that argument was superseded by stronger arguments, which were that there should be a global rate. We make our arguments, we're not always, our arguments don't always win out. But there was also a strong number of arguments about what that minimum rate should be and where those thresholds and parameters should sit. So the international community, having now arrived at a position which wouldn't have been my personal preference at the outset of this argument, we still play our role as an important international citizen, and we then implement it. But as you know, in the drafting and how we've drafted this legislation is a recognition that 15 is the rate that should be paid, and that we wouldn't want companies operating in Jersey to suffer double taxation elsewhere, which means they're paying a higher rate.
Can we dive into that a little bit? You talk about it as a sovereign matter, and we have chosen, or government has chosen, to exercise some sovereignty over this, as you indicate. And there are some parts of the model rules that we are not choosing to implement. Could you explain what those are and what the rationale was?
Well, I think I've just really touched on the main area that we're not implementing, which is the undertaxed profit rule, which is a rule which is in its design extraterritorial. So it's saying that if a company in Jersey has other branches or sub-operations elsewhere, and they are not implementing Pillar 2, and there are very few of those in practice, then that you will do a calculation in your jurisdiction that says you're taking the tax to top it up to the 15% if it's less than somewhere else. We've taken the view that that is not something that has been in our economic model in the past, and we're not going to introduce it now.
The aim of Pillar 2 is to prevent profit shifting, and you've identified that that could inadvertently effectively lead to double taxation because of other regimes that are in place in other countries.
So it's not the profit shifting that would lead to double taxation, it's the other regimes that have global tax regimes which are a different basis to the one that the OECD has introduced.
And we're talking particularly there about...
well, of course, I think I'm right. I'm thinking the only other jurisdiction that has a full global tax regime is the US. Others have elements that might look like it, but not a full global regime.
So what is Jersey doing to try and address those concerns of entities that could be subjected to a double taxation effectively?
So the first thing to say is that it's not us that recognises. We've not just suddenly thought, oh, there's an issue here. Within the model rules itself, it says that there is a mismatch. It doesn't use that terminology, of course. But there's a mismatch between those two regimes, and it refers to it as a blended CFC regime, and it recognises that. And what we have done in regard to that is saying, okay, the OECD themselves have created a transitional period for that mismatch to allow changes in the US domestic regime. What we have done have introduced a transitional regime that means that, roughly speaking, the approach that we have taken will mean that those companies that could be suffering, those US companies in that regime that could be suffering double taxation, we can help to mitigate that for this transitional period, pointing to the model rules.
So what kind of mitigation are we talking about?
We're talking about a credit.
So they would not necessarily pay the 15% in Jersey because they would be able to prove that they had paid some tax somewhere else.
That they are in what's called excess guilty elsewhere, yes.
And is there any possibility within that those companies in Jersey, which might well be on 10% taxation rates at the moment under our 0-10 regime, could end up paying a lower tax rate in Jersey than they currently do, because they are moved on to a new tax rate which has discounts available which weren't available under 0-10?
So I can't give you a cast iron answer one way or the other to that, because each company's facts and circumstances will be different and are different, and they're different in any given trading year. And so it's really not possible to say with certainty yes or no to that. We continue to work on those issues. What we do know, of course, is that the basis of the tax calculation under the two regimes is different. The basis of the tax calculation under 0-10 is, as the law says, under 0-10. Under the new regime and under the model rules, it's based on the accounting approach approach. And so you've got a different basis. So because of a different basis, even with a higher or lower rate, you could still end up paying the same quantum of money, even though the rate that's been applied is a different rate, because the basis has changed, and as we know, the facts and circumstances of each company will change during a given year anyway. So it is.
I was just going to ask, it's a very specific question about whether there are any companies likely to be caught in this which are charged at the 20% rate locally, so presumably retail companies that are trading over 750 million euros, and would they effectively see a reduction in their tax liability, or would it be fixed at 20% still?
So it's really the same answer, because it's the same question, that we can't say with certainty, because of the facts and circumstances, that the amount of tax may be less. But yes, of course, those in-scope companies are moving from 0.10,
I guess,
and the large corporate retailer rate is 20% currently. If there are in-scope retailers, and this is why I have to be careful because this is taxpayer-sensitive information, and Islanders walking down the high street might make guesses. If there are in-scope large corporate retailers, they will move from the 20% into the new MSIT, which, as you rightly point out, is 15%.
but is that automatic, or do they have to? Because the MSIT is a minimum 15% rate, right? So
so the MSIT is a 15% rate. The new global regime is a minimum 15%.
But could Jersey have not made the decision to keep retailers at 20% rather than reverting them to the 15%, given the fact that 15 was supposed to be a minimum rather than a ceiling? You see what I mean?
Well, I've taken the view, ministers have taken the view that 15 is both the minimum in Jersey and the ceiling.
And the maximum.
That's
and can we quantify
that's important. So
can we quantify the loss for the retail tax revenue?
No, because we're not. But just because something's moving from 20 to 15 doesn't mean to say there's a loss, because the basis of the initial calculation is different. If you'd kept the basis absolutely the same, then yes, your question would have been a good question that we could have answered.
Yeah.
But because we are changing that basis, we can't say. Oddly enough, in a few years' time, once the process has been in, we will be able to answer.
And that's because the whole group is affected, not just the
the
entity that's trading in Jersey. Is
And
that
even
right?
the fact that under 0.10 you calculated company by company, whereas under these new rules you'll have one consolidated Jersey group, so there could be losses offset between entities. So there's lots of moving factors in there that make it very difficult to do that.
Thank you.
Yes, yes, thank you. Yes, Minister, you already referred to the US situation. You may, in fact, have answered the question I was going to ask, so perhaps you'll put it again. The sub-panels noted that the draft legislation does not mention GILTI, the United States-based global intangible low-taxed income regime. Could you clarify why GILTI is not so mentioned within the legislation?
Shall I ask you to?
Sure. So because the legislation route for the MSIT is...
I think we've said MSIT several times. I
So
think we need to say what the MSIT is.
The multinational corporate income tax.
This is the
legislation
New
that has
Jersey
been
rate
launched.
of tax
So
that
it's
is
a new
being
corporate
incorporated.
income
It's a new corporate income tax for in-scope companies. Thank you.
As the Minister said, the OECD has a transitional way for allocating blended CFCs like the US GILTI. And because we are using the OECD approach, they use the term blended CFC. And so likewise, the legislation that has been lodged also uses the blended CFC, just so that taxpayers, again, understanding we're using the transitional OECD approach.
So it's because, effectively, it's because that's what the OECD refers to.
Yeah.
They don't refer to it explicitly, so we don't.
Yeah. Well, yeah. They use a different term for for something, and therefore we are pointing to those rules, and that's therefore the term that we use.
Yeah, we want to make it very clear that we're leveraging off the model rules and the terminology in the model rules, rather than introducing a kind of a new name for it.
Okay.
It's very clear to everybody that it's totally linked to the model rules. We felt that's a safer position.
And so the mechanism we have, you are maintaining, it does conform with the international standards and our commitments to the OECD, albeit in a perhaps not easily comprehensible way to laymen.
Well, it was important to us to show that, okay, as I've said, there is flexibility within the OECD commentary, and there are, as I said right at the start, a number of reasons why we chose the, what would you like me to call it, MSIT?
MSIT is fine, now we've explained it, I think.
The MSIT, which gives us flexibility. We have spoken and with the OECD, we have been transparent with our interlocutors about the approach that we were taking.
Okay.
Yeah. So you've partly answered the next question already, but it relates to the undertaxed profits rule, or the UTPR, as we'll call it probably now, going forward. So given that the undertaxed profit rule acts as a backstop to the income inclusion rule, how might its absence impact Jersey's ability to prevent profit shifting and ensure that multinational enterprises are paying their fair share of taxes?
But what's important for us is that people aren't using Jersey for base erosion and profit shifting. It comes back to the point that you pushed me on earlier. Other countries can make their, they might take a different approach. But for us, it was important to stick to our economic model as far as we possibly could. But by implementing both the income inclusion rule, or IIR as we'll call it now, and the new corporate income tax, we were ensuring that we weren't used in that way, or continuing to ensure that we weren't used in that way.
Yeah, thank you. I think that answers.
Deputy. Yep, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for being in attendance today, Minister and Assistant Minister. The panel just wants to ask, what was the process involved in lodging the propositions, and also we are aware that in the budget as well, we saw the Pillar 2 tax was mentioned before the actual propositions were debated again, and that's going to take place later this month. So I just want to know what the rationale was behind that.
Well, as in adding a forecast of possible income before the legislation had been
Debated by the State Assembly, yes.
I think we would have been criticised if we hadn't put it in, knowing what we knew, that we would be bringing forward legislation to ensure that Jersey's compliance with the model rules. I think we were quite clear that this has been an evolving, and it continues to change as countries either gain experience in it, or OECD thinks about things which it needs to clarify in order to make it work. We chose to give certainty by saying that we would be implementing from accounting period starting after the 1st of January 2025, but it's still been difficult to deal with all of the clarifications coming from the OECD, changes to the model rules, and then thinking about what that meant for our legislation, engaging with all of the stakeholders that we have done. So it has taken us longer than we would have liked, but we knew this was going to be quite a pressurised environment, which wouldn't coincide with the government plan. Yeah. But it would have been wrong of us to bring it forward, bring the legislation forward post the government plan, and not to have included a forecast of the money in the government plan that we knew that if states members agreed this would be there. I think that we'd have been in a more difficult situation, but we know it's not ideal.
Yeah. Thank you, Minister, for the clarification. You mentioned that it took longer than you anticipated. Originally, what was the timeline for this to be brought before the State Assembly and to be?
Well, I think we had hoped to have it lodged before the summer recess. Corey, you'll just remind me of.
We did say that we would lodge it in July, and I think we lodged it in August. Is that my memory of it?
Okay. Yeah, we were a few weeks.
Yeah. Of course, there is mention of the baseline in the government budget of 52 million. So what is the intention with this new revenue stream? Do you believe that it's going to be used for any particular purpose, or is it just going to be used for additional revenue in the consolidated fund to facilitate government expenditure?
Well, it's certainly not going to be used for additional revenue. I think what we've set out in the government plan, that it will be a significant proportion will be earmarked for to top up reserves, because that is clearly important. We always knew we had to do that. So I think we've got about 41.6 million going into reserves. We have 15 million which will be used to invest in competitiveness, because it's very important that, given the potential changes that Pillar 2 creates, it's important that we make sure Jersey is a competitive place, that people still want to work here and do business. They still want to be here and grow and invest in Jersey, so it's important that we do that work. And Deputy Gorst, we're just starting up that piece of a group we met this week to start looking at competitive work, how we boost competitiveness, maintain that. And then the third thing from the base case is it will contribute to the financing costs of the hospital, so interest and issuance costs.
Okay, thank you very
So
much.
it won't go into general revenue pot.
Okay.
Can I just check on the reserves? Which reserves? Are we talking strategic stabilisation, bit of both?
Stabilisation fund. Sorry, every time I say it, I think it's going into strategic reserve or stabilisation fund. I think base case goes into. Sorry,
Definitely
I did the chamber speech today, and I'm
It's
just.
not a trick question, but it's
Yes, I just because they both begin with S.
the rainy day fund or the stabilisation.
We are putting stabilising Pillar 2 revenues will go into the stabilisation fund. In the base case, will go into stabilisation fund.
Yeah, I can see that's the recommendation from the fiscal policy plan, and that's
That
what
was
you're
our
doing.
that's
your recommendation.
That's our intention. They have
Good.
kind of approved it and
Thanks.
said. I think they have said that is a
They're happy with
kind
that.
of sensible thing to do, because clearly they want us to build up the strategic reserve and the stabilisation fund.
And would you consider putting, because they also recommend that any excess, and I very much accept the fact that we're in a bit of an unknown here. You've had to make a prediction. We might ask about how you came to the £52 million, in fact, and whether let's do that first. Is that a conservative estimate? How realistic is that in terms of an estimate?
I think it's a reasonable but probably prudent estimate.
So yeah.
So you would hope that there would be more?
No, so we sorry, did you want to keep
No,
going?
you carry on.
So what we did was think about whenever you change a tax rate, whenever you change a tax, you can never be sure of what behavioural changes might arise out of that. You can do everything in your power, as we are doing, to make sure that we continue to be competitive, that we make the implementation as as easy as possible, that we put wrap customer service and use technology around its implementation, as we are doing, and we're happy to go on and talk about. But you can never actually be 100% sure about behavioural change. So what we've done in this calculation is look at those businesses who are, it's not really a technical term, but you could say are stickier into Jersey. So those businesses that would be most unlikely to change their behaviour arising out of this change. I mean, there is, of course, on the other side of the argument that this is a global initiative and therefore this tax can't be avoided by just simply moving somewhere else. But we know that there's structuring and all of those things that come into play. So the base case is based on those in-scope companies for whom it's unlikely that they would move or they couldn't move easily. What that, of course, means is that there is a potential substantial upside, but that upside could range from nothing to quite a big number. I don't know what that quite a big number could be, but so we've put in what we call this base case that we can be reasonably certain will be raised, and it's, as the Minister said, it's good to see the FPP saying that was a sensible, prudent approach to take. In the government plan, there is also a high-level indication of what might happen to an upside, but of course that upside would ultimately end up being a year-end number as well, and it really is open for debate as we come forward to the next government plan to think about what we would do with that upside as well.
Can we push you on that? Because the FPP, the Financial Policy Panel, said that they recommend a formal commitment to ring fence any Pillar 2 income in excess of the base case into either the Strategic Reserve or the Stabilisation Fund. Do you regard that as a sensible recommendation?
Yes. I think, I don't speak for the Minister, I think the Minister and I think that that would be a sensible, prudent approach. I think it's fair to say that some of our other colleagues may have different priorities that they would like to see funding allocated for. So I think that will be a debate that has to be had A, around the Council of Ministers table, and B, in the States Assembly.
Can I just ask also, given the fact that you said it's a conservative estimate, and of course any excess is relative to whatever the estimate, another government might have given a higher estimate. So is there also a case to say that you should just use the same formula split for the entirety of what's being proposed? So
yeah, there is, because if we've taken the hospital, this is just funding the borrowing cost. If you took the same split on the upside, you'd then be reducing some of the capital cost of borrowing, so that would work. You'd be increasing your spend on maintaining Jersey's competitiveness, and you'd also be increasing the amount of money going into reserves. So this is where you get a little, it can get a little bit wooden dollars, because if you are reducing your capital cost of borrowing, you are ultimately freeing up more money for reserves anyway in the medium term. So you could still argue, other than the allocation that you put to competitiveness, that you're really allocating it then for reserves, but it gets a bit mute point.
Yeah, I think actually, Minister, you answered some of the questions we're going to ask later on concerning the fiscal policy panel, and maybe we'll come back to them. But on that, am I right in thinking that the figures were based on almost a defensive attitude of trying to maintain the clientele, if that's the right word we have in Jersey, rather than as a programme or for potential new business?
There's always compromise in politics, Constable. Some of us might have wanted to do a split which was simply competitiveness and reserves. We recognise the need to build and fund the hospital. So there's not, other than the amount of money that you need to cover the financing of the hospital, there's not a lot of science into the split of the other two numbers. What is important is that we do focus on competitiveness, because one of the things that we see other jurisdictions doing is making offers to businesses around support that they will give to maintaining in-scope companies in their jurisdictions. And individual businesses have also been asking us the question. They're saying to us, well, Singapore is offering us A, B, C and D. What are you offering, Minister? It's not straightforward for Jersey because there are constraints within the model rules about what can and should be done. And B, when we look at what other people are doing, none of them perfectly fit what we would want in Jersey. But I am absolutely 100% convinced that we do have to do that work, and we have to do it fairly quickly, and we are doing that work.
Thank you. On the question of other jurisdictions, we've chosen to defer implementation of Pillar 2 till 2025, whereas some have, as the UK and EU member states, already implemented it from 2024. Can you explain the considerations behind that timing, or is it essentially what you already explained to us? It's taken a long time to get thus far.
Well, it was a lot of uncertainty and quite a bit of pragmatism. What we've seen is that things have changed and been clarified in this last year. In hindsight, I am really pleased that we didn't push forward for an accounting period ending, starting on 1st January 2024. Because we see other jurisdictions now having to change their approach. We were discussing that only yesterday. So they are having to change because of the changes in the model rules and the commentary and the codes and all of that stuff. So it's a good job that we did that. What that did create, though, of course, was a difficulty, temporary difficulty for EU and UK parented companies, where they were going to be in scope for that 1 year, which is why at the start of this year we knew we had to give certainty about when we were going to implement, even though we knew we weren't totally certain that things weren't going to change as they have. So there were some in-scope companies that would, on preference, have preferred a 24 introduction, but they've recognised when we spoke to them the benefits of waiting until 25, and those that wanted us to wait till 25 for more certainty and to work through things were absolutely certain that 24 was wrong and would have caused them really great difficulties.
Okay, feeding off another answer you gave, you mentioned competitiveness, that's the right word, from other jurisdictions. Has our own situation affected our relationships with those jurisdictions and international reputation generally?
No, I don't think so. So we've tried to think about competitiveness even in the way that we've designed, as I've tried to say, even in the way that we've designed our legislation, in the way that we've had an open, transparent communication with in-scope companies and stakeholders, so introducers, be they in stateside or in the UK or in the EU. So we're also thinking about competitiveness in how we actually do the implementation of as I've indicated, but we also need to think about the wider competitiveness of Jersey to financial services businesses more generally.
Okay, thank you.
I think 7's been covered largely, would you say?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. tell me if this question makes sense to you. I caveat it. So, would there be a situation in which a Jersey-based multinational enterprise that potentially would face double taxation due to different interpretations or implementations of Pillar 2? And what mechanisms would there be to resolve such disputes? Is that something that is...
Well, it's a good question because, well, it's theoretical, but it is a good question. Whenever there is a new global process, there needs to be a
Dispute resolution.
that's it, dispute resolution
Yes.
process. That dispute resolution process has, I'll be generous and say it's not been finalised by the OECD. And the reality is, I don't think they've yet given much thought to it. They know it's going to be necessary. It will be necessary. There's no reason why we should be before that dispute resolution mechanism any more than anybody else should, but it is going to require a dispute mechanism for the very reasons that you say, because countries will, by their very nature, maybe want to do things ever so slightly differently at the edges, but we have had half a mind to that in the way that we've developed our legislation all the way through to make sure that it was clear that we were following the model rules. And I don't know if you're going to ask me this later, but we already know as we sit here that we're going to need to make a couple of amendments, which we will, I don't know if we've shared, we probably haven't shared with you yet because they're still with law drafting, one of which is around the IIR legislation, making it clear that there's an ambulatory provision to incorporate changes in effect the code of what's the word I'm looking for? Commentary. To make sure it's clear that we are actually it will automatically happen. Another one around losses. We thought it was clear. But others have said to us it's not quite as clear as it might be about what you're doing with losses. So because of what's happening, these things are going to inevitably happen.
So these are two amendments that are coming to the legislation before it's debated on the 22nd of October.
Yeah.
And this is specifically around the dispute resolution or related?
No, it's about making it clear that both of these, that we are following the model rules, and it's important that we make it clear that we're following the model rules because of the if ever there is a dispute and we need to use the dispute resolution mechanism, we can show clearly that we've been following the model rules.
Thank you.
And following on from that, what major economies have not yet aligned or committed to align with the Pillar 2 framework?
I don't know the answer.
The US would be the...
Oh, sorry, yeah, of course, I know the US have.
Yeah.
Well,
Sorry,
I should have said other major ones.
I just live with
maybe.
that every day.
Other offshore jurisdictions, for example.
As we sit here, the Cayman Islands have not committed to implementing Pillar 2.
Does that pose...
Can you think of any others?
There's probably some others who have been silent, so...
You can't. Yeah.
But we can't read into that. They may yet do it.
Yeah.
Can you clarify with the Cayman? I know we've heard from you in the private briefings that in the Cayman, is it because essentially they don't have the infrastructure to collect taxes? Is that one of the reasons? Is it rather than it being ideological, would you say?
Well, it's not really for me to speak on behalf of another government, but if I were going to speak on behalf of another government, I might surmise some reasons why they might not at this point wish to implement. One would be, the maturity of their tax regime, which they don't have a tax regime. One would be the base of their business coming from the states, and so in that regard, they could see that maybe they don't need to, because that business is really covered under the states guilty regime. Yeah, I think they would be the main two. I personally think, and there's not a commentary on them at all, I personally think that jurisdictions over time will introduce it, because they'll ask themselves, well, why are we giving tax earned on profits in our country to other countries?
Yeah.
That may take some time to get to that point.
Yeah, so thank you for that. I mean, I did have a further question about if there were a number of significant jurisdictions which chose not to implement Pillar 2, how would that affect the level playing field which the initiative is aimed to produce? But from your answer, you're saying that's not going to be a situation.
Well, but because of the design, it isn't possible to avoid paying the tax. You'd have just stopped paying it. You wouldn't pay it in one place, but another country could, because of the rules, take the tax from you in their country, even though it was a profit arising somewhere else. So unless there are specific fact patterns, you would expect most countries and jurisdictions to implement it. Our friends in the US are slightly different, because they already have a global tax regime. So their view is that why on earth has the OECD come along and done something different to our regime? Why didn't they just mirror our regime as the global regime? And it presents problems for them, as we've said about the blended CFC rule. We don't know, as we sit here, of course, what the US will do, if anything, to align its domestic global system with the OECD system, or whether it will engage with the OECD when we've got the changing in things there, to seek change there. I don't know. Tom, you've got your hand up there.
Well, it was only just to say, because it's worth almost taking a step back and thinking about what makes this project unusual. And I think it's the combination of two features. One is that it is a common approach rather than a hard and fast international standard. And what that means is jurisdictions have options and choices when it comes to their implementation pathway, provided their options and choices, should they choose to implement, align with the overall framework of the rules. So that's the first thing. And the second thing that almost contrasts a bit with that is the way the rules are designed. They are an interlocking series of rules, so that if a particular jurisdiction chooses, for whatever reason, that it will not implement, then the tax is nonetheless captured somewhere else by other jurisdictions' use of the rules, and potentially in that situation then by topping up on the under-taxed element of the company's profits. So although it's a common approach and jurisdictions can pick and choose, the way the rules are designed, they will capture the underlying businesses, whether a particular jurisdiction has chosen to implement or not. And I just thought it might just be worth chucking that in, because it's worth just keeping that in mind when thinking about what each jurisdiction is taking into consideration in terms of its implementation pathway. I hope that was helpful.
As ever, my officials say far more relevant than I.
Did you want to take question 11, Max?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Chair. Minister, with the implementation of the income inclusion rule and the multinational corporate income tax, I just want to know whether any concerns have been raised with you as Minister for Treasury and Exchequer by any individuals or potentially firms about Jersey's approach moving forward.
So other than the point that I raised in regard to answering the Constable's question about the timing, because of UK and EU countries implementing earlier, and it wasn't actually concern, it was just their preference would have been for, but they recognised why we were taking the approach that we were taking. I am not aware of either of entities or in-scope companies raising concerns. Rather, they've been pleased with the open and transparent engagement that officials have had with them, and in effect want that to continue. And the approach that we have taken has been one that they have supported.
Yeah. And what do you think this will do in terms of Jersey's status as an international centre with the approach that you've taken as Minister for Treasury?
Well, in light of the fact that this is a global approach, I think that the way that we have managed it thus far, and we expect to continue to manage it in this manner, shows that we are a jurisdiction which understands business, that understands global business, and that we want to, within the rule of the international approach, work together to support business growth, not only in Jersey, but their aspirations around the globe as well.
Obviously, the panel was aware of Jersey's recent Moneyval assessment, and of course we anticipate the additional revenue will be generating as a result of Pillar 2 tax revenues pending on the State Assembly approving both propositions. So do you think this will be an opportunity potentially for such investment to be made in financial services, and maybe where there's areas of weakness or areas where improvements ought to be made?
So we'll use the 15 million allocated. It isn't until 2026, so in effect state members have 2 goes at looking at that. So it's for 2026, so we've got, there's quite a lot of water to go under the bridge before that's written in black and white, or approved in black and white. Sorry, I've forgotten really what you were asking me. We want to maintain a competitive jurisdiction, and that will mean that we need to spend money to do that. As you will know, I think from the other briefings, that we are working at pace on a
Qualifying refundable tax credit.
That's it. I just call it a tax credit. But qualifying refundable tax credit means that it qualifies within the model rules, but it's a tax credit, something which we haven't done very much before in Jersey, and therefore it's important that we get it right. And what does getting it right mean? Well, it probably means that we want those businesses to grow their businesses in Jersey. So that might be assets under management. So we are working with partners to think about what that tax credit could look like for Jersey, which means that businesses grow their Jersey operation.
And do you think with the 15 million that you have allocated and planned for in investments, that it may align with some of the broader policy objectives that the Council of Ministers have, such as the upskilling and reskilling of the workforce as well?
Yeah, well, I
absolutely
expect that it will, because the skills agenda is not a unique agenda to financial services. It's right across our economy. The housing agenda, the childcare agenda, all of those are universal issues faced by all islanders right across the economy.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Can you clarify on that? The 15 million, this amount of money that's coming from Pillar 2 revenues that you've notionally allocated to competitiveness, what things are in scope for that spending and what things are specifically excluded? In other words, you couldn't just shovel this money back to the companies who've paid it in a direct, so that would be excluded. But can you just talk us through what is allowed and what might not be?
Well, and this is part of the difficulty of making sure that it's qualifying, because go back to Deputy Taddy's point about disputes. Other countries could say, well, just a minute, you are giving all the money back again, therefore it doesn't. Therefore, we are going to tax in our country because we don't think that your system is properly working. I don't have the parameters of what qualifies and what doesn't in front of me. I suspect that we're going to see further clarification of what does and doesn't qualify because of what some other countries have done and what they have proposed. There is a country which has proposed exactly that. We're just going to give you all the money back, and that's caused quite a bit of contention at the OECD.
That's around
really
the effective,
against the spirit.
the effective tax rate and the actual tax rate.
So there are rules that are developing around these tax credits that are called the no benefits rule, which basically say that you can't take the same pot of money and give it back to the same group of companies, because then you're not really implementing the tax fairly. So if we were to introduce a tax credit, we'd have to think very carefully about the breadth of who we were targeting with it and the design of it, who the population is, what we're trying to achieve by it. And for financial services, that is, there are some tax credits that exist in the world already around R&D tax credits, for example. That's really not a huge part of Jersey's business. So we need to do similarly to what we did with the MSIT and just think about it in the context of Jersey. What would actually incentivise businesses on the one hand and add to that breadth and depth of substance, but also come within the rules, not fall foul of the rules. So
is that's something you could, there's not a rush in a sense to do that, because it'll presumably come organically, but the business community will also be telling you if there are things which Jersey's missing out on, presumably.
It's a balance.
Which
so
fall within
we are
the scope.
Committed to doing it and doing it at pace. Nearly all of our interlocutors say, look, get it right rather than quick. But there are also quite a number saying, just get on and get something done. We are starting to coalesce around some of the aims that we might want to deliver. So this is this thing about growing your business in Jersey. Officials have had, I think, already some good conversations with experts and affected in-scope companies, but we're not there yet.
And just to be clear, I mean, you're talking there about something very specific to the finance industry. Would that 15 million, those competitive funds for competition, improving competition, would they be available for just things like improving the housing, access to housing, or something like that? Would they be?
That's not what we're proposing with this element of the base case.
Sorry.
I was just going to follow up. Could it be something that's both good for business and for the wider society, though? So, for example, and it's not limited to this, but investing in digital literacy, digital infrastructure, that kind of thing, would that be something which arguably businesses might benefit as well from and welcome?
It could, and particularly around the digital area and training, I think that's where you could see the most universal benefit. Because we've never done, let's say if we just, let's just focus on the tax credit, because we've never done a tax credit like this before, one of the questions we don't know is how much take-up would there be in the community? How much or how many more assets would people bring here to have under management if there was this qualifying tax credit to it? So we're not quite sure about how we're going to divvy up that 15 million. There is an argument that says we should do a bit more promotional work as well, particularly in the States. We've got growing markets from there as well, so we need to think about that. For my part, and I would say this, wouldn't I, 15 million isn't actually that much to think about the wider competitiveness of Jersey and getting into the areas that you are talking to. So if we could, as these debates go on, secure more for competitiveness, that will give us more opportunity to do the things that you're just talking about. which I think are
Just very one
critical
last-
for wider
Could you
competitiveness.
clarify that this is 15 million additional? There's already business as usual going on, which does ensure a level of competitiveness for Jersey, presumably. So this is just additional.
This is additional. So we have a financial services team, we have a promotional budget, but when we compare that with what other jurisdictions are spending on promotion and policy development, it isn't very much.
Okay.
There's one specific thing, there's mention in the report about the tripartite group, which is made up of the industry, the government and the regulator, and they're working on competitiveness. Is that
Your ministerial.
Yes,
group,
I did.
called the tripartite group? Yeah. I mean, I guess in a sense, is this the same thing that we've been talking about now, or is that what that tripartite group is set up to do, or is that something slightly different? Is that a different work stream?
So we've got lots of these work streams will ultimately filter up into that group. So we've got the review of the regulatory environment, that's comes under the auspice of that. We've got the tax credit, qualifying refundable tax credit. That the design of that will be done in Revenue Jersey, but it comes up under that group. So we've got things strategic that we're thinking about, but also things tactical, some short term and others much longer. So, the answer is probably yes.
So is that the decision making? Well, not necessarily decision making, but the sort of the formulation of policy body.
One of the things that I think we've recognised is that international tax policy and tax policy can be in itself part of Jersey's competitiveness. How we manage it, how we engage, how we use technology. In this case, how we've designed it in legislation is an important element of being competitive in certain of our markets. So is what we're doing in external relations, so is what we're doing in financial services. And so we're trying to just, in effect, create a coordination body to make sure that we're all focused on Jersey remaining competitive.
Sounds quite important. Should we be publishing minutes of that?
I doubt it's not that exciting. But equally, you see, the work that Deputy Mesic is doing in housing is important. The work that Deputy Ward is doing around skills is important as well, and childcare work. So, you know.
Can I come on with one specific point, and I hope you take it in the right spirit, is that so the work of the tripartite group in your report says it's to improve the attractiveness of the island for doing business and economic growth, long-term prosperity. Can I just ask to what extent it's the role of the regulator to be involved in promoting that particular area? It sounds like marketing in a sense.
Well, no, it's not. It's not just marketing, is it? The role of the regulator is very important in Jersey remaining competitive. In the past, the regulator has had a number of MOU, well, they're still live, but MOUs with regulators around the globe. And more, the responsiveness and the customer-focused service that the regulator brings is critical alongside its AML and other bits of its work. And so I think it is absolutely right, because if Jersey is providing a service to global businesses, we need to make sure that we are providing that service well.
Okay. No, I get that they've got an important role to play in Jersey's offering, and as to make sure it's well regulated. So I guess what I would ask is that how do you ensure that they're not in any way compromised and that their role is maintained as a regulator when they're involved in that tripartite group, who's I think the tripartite group which is looking to coordinate competitiveness.
Yeah.
Is that
A
something you're...
regulator is independent. And why is a regulator independent? A regulator is independent so that they can make decisions about how they regulate with specific firms outside of governmental interference. But everything that we do in government, and I think we've lost this, should have the democratic overlay. So independent regulatory bodies are actually accountable to the public through the democratic process. And so I think that, and it's not a Jersey specific thing. We see this as conversations being had in the UK. Who is the regulator accountable to? Because it should be accountable to the public. And therefore I don't accept that, yes, the regulator is independent, it makes those decisions independently, but it has a work to do, and it's in its governing MOU to have a mind for jobs and growth, and it should have a mind for the competitiveness of Jersey, because you can, in the authorisation department, you can have an approach which does authorising new companies, new businesses that takes 48 hours or 2 weeks, or you can have one that takes 12 months. That has a direct correlation with how competitive we are. It's not saying you've got to say yes to this and no to this and yes to this. It's simply saying how you deliver that service is critical to our competitiveness.
Thank you.
Next, do you want to talk to, which one are we up to?
I think we're 13 now.
13, yes, 13. Yeah,
Question, sorry.
I think the one thing I would take with this question is about the longer term. There have been
I don't know
people.
what the question is.
So there are people who have approached us who've said that we should not.
Yes.
We should not be implementing this because although we will get a short-term gain, and the long term, at the very least, we should be thinking about what the long-term implication of this is for Jersey's competitiveness. We have had an advantageous tax regime. We're not going to have that advantageous tax regime. What are the risks that sit around that, and how have you made the calculus, the decisions around that?
So it's a very fair challenge, but I would answer that question by looking at the way that the model rules are designed. So it is not correct to believe that companies that are currently in Jersey and paying zero will now become in scope of our new MSIP, but in scope of the rules, and needing to pay a minimum of 15. It is not correct to say they could move somewhere else and not pay the 15. They could move somewhere else, but then the other country here will then just take that tax. So if we don't implement it, it will mean that tax that could be in Jersey and could benefit islanders will just be paid somewhere else because of the way the rules are designed. So we could say we're not going to take that tax, but that's not actually quite as straightforward as it then seems, because that then creates quite a layer of bureaucracy, an added bureaucracy that these companies have to do in another country to calculate under the same basis what their liability to tax in Jersey would have been, and then just pay it somewhere else. So we, I think, can make sure that we remain competitive in the way that we implement it, and it is really critical that we get that bit of implementation right, and that's why we spent so much time and engagement, both thinking about it, designing it, and then now moving on to the implementation stage, using a portal, creating a specialist team of international tax experts, which we've already got people doing excellent work and have had throughout this period in helping us design it. It's really important that we get that bit right, because that bit is what plays to the concerns that some people have about the long-term competitiveness of Jersey. As I sit here, everything that I've heard from those that we've engaged with make me confident that we will and are, in how we're doing this, remaining competitive, and we can continue to show this approach well, then we can continue to attract business. There are other things within our competitive environment that need some work, which is why we've created the competitiveness board. I suppose where I really do have most sympathy with those who are concerned is not about the implementation of Pillar 2, it's about the overall complacency across our economy that things will always remain good, because they always have been good, and we cannot take that for granted. How we respond to these international agendas is critical, playing our part and doing what we think is in our best interest, both in the short and the long term.
Sorry,
Chair. Could I just reinforce the early comments of the Minister, because I do think it's really important that people understand this principle, that just because if Jersey took the choice not to implement Pillar 2, these businesses would still pay 15% on their Jersey profits. They just wouldn't pay it in Jersey. And I know the Minister has said that, I just wanted to say it again, because I've heard that.
And we would therefore lose the revenue as a government.
We would lose the revenue, they would still pay the tax.
I guess the bigger point behind
it would be more bureaucratic for them.
Yes, yeah.
Because they would be having to comply with somebody else's bureaucracy on their Jersey operation. They want to be, they've been clear to us, they want to be able to say, in Jersey, I'm compliant with the model rules of Pillar 2, box ticked in headquarters.
But the bigger point is that we're a ship that's sailing into uncharted waters. The tax regime is going to be different. There is a supposition that it will be 15% everywhere, and therefore one of our points of distinction has gone. What I'm getting from you is that you believe that by the design of this, we have maintained the points of difference and done so sufficiently by clever design, sufficiently well to maintain some level of competitiveness in a tax sense.
That's right, and we remind ourselves that it's another reason why we've kept 0-10 separate. 95%, is it 95 or 96% of companies are remaining in 0-10, paying on that basis either 0 or 10. Obviously, utilities, property, large corporate retailers.
Can we say for now?
No, we can't say for now. That is, we are maintaining 0-10. We've created a separate corporate income tax to ensure for in-scope companies we're compliant and competitive. None of us can ever say what the future will be, but in the approach that we've taken, we have maintained, I believe, our competitive advantage.
Can I ask something very briefly? It goes back to those stakeholders who very publicly suggested, and what you've quite rightly corrected and what we've understood, I think, early on, is that it simply wasn't an option to not adopt this, and Jersey would have lost out on so much revenue.
Well, no, we could have not done it because it is a common approach, not a minimum standard. So that in there we could have said we're not going to do it. But why would we say we are going to let somebody else take the tax on Jersey profits?
Indeed. But my point is, you're making this point to us now. Do you think that message has got out loudly enough to the public? Because two fairly high-profile people have made, I think, a fundamental mistake in their understanding of this to be able to write so publicly and potentially worry people. Is this something that you could make a response to in the public forum? And I suppose
Well, I've learnt after all the years that just because somebody's written something in the newspaper, getting into a tit for tat is not the best way of informing the public about something. I do think that the narrative of those who were worried about that initially has changed, and they are now talking about what are the longer term implications, will rates change, etc., etc. And that's something we've always got to be mindful of.
Is there a risk that Jersey could be too successful in designing these rules, in the sense that we attract criticism from people who feel we've sailed close to the wind on what's permissible under that common approach?
So we have not. I don't believe that is a terminology that we can use to describe what we have done. All the way along, we have looked to the model rules. We've incorporated the model rules by reference. We've incorporated the model rules by reference. We're going to be making a couple of those amendments to clarify even further that we're pointing to the model rules where there might have been any uncertainty. In regard to the way that we've pointed to the CFC regime, right back to the constable's question earlier, we have pointed to what the OECD have themselves recognised is a discrepancy between two global regimes in a transition nature, just in the same way that the OECD have put in a transitional what's the word? It's been too long. You're keeping me here too long. Losing my words.
Feel free to bring your officers in at any time.
It's a transitional approach. So we have been really mindful that some might want to make an accusation like that against us, and that is why we have constantly pointed back to the model rules, and it is why we have engaged with stakeholders and been open and transparent with them.
I've got a very specific question. I know it's something you did answer satisfactorily in the private briefing, and it relates to the 750 million turnover. Are there companies which, is there any behaviour which might change in terms of companies who are just below the 550 million revenue? 750, sorry, I've got 750 written down, I don't know why I said that. And in terms of either taking measures not to get to 750, so that they might not pay that in any given year. And I know it's about the groups as well, so could you just clarify that it would be very difficult for companies to rearrange their structures to avoid that £750 million threshold if they were otherwise above it?
Yeah, I mean, sure. So there are, these issues are kind of foreseen in the rules, that groups might try to structure themselves so that they weren't within the thresholds. So there's averaging rules, so you have to kind of average your results over a number of years. There's also fragmentation rules.
So you can't split your company up to avoid.
So there, that has been foreseen in a way. whether you would deliberately sort of stay below the 750 million. Not sure, because I suppose you're just limiting the size of your business through that would have quite bigger implications. But these things have been anticipated in the rules, and so all of those measures are automatically brought into our regime through the model rules.
So could you give me an example? Is it, if a company wanted to, say, split itself and sell part of its company to someone else, like a relative, but it was a distinct company, is that envisaged or paid?
I think the safeguard for us as a tax authority and a jurisdiction is that these rules are basically, they fundamentally work off consolidated financial statements, which is new. That's a kind of new methodology. So, you know, it's a question of fact as to whether the auditors say that if you have consolidated financial statements and those consolidated financial statements show that you have global turnover of over 750 million, then de facto you are within the rules. So, you know, that process has all of the auditing that's gone behind it, so that there's a lot of reliance can be placed on that.
Yeah, without wishing to be negative, I mean, it is someone who's set on structuring or fragmenting their business. It would be difficult to trace them if they did it through different jurisdictions. So if there weren't any jurisdictions common, it would mean that could be it's a variation on tax avoidance, quite simply.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I'm sure there's always people will think about that. I think that they've got to get through their auditors, at least that is, and prove that they're not a consolidated group. So I think that is an additional bar that hasn't been there in tax bases in the world.
I have gone down that route, but so that there are responsibilities on auditors to check any departures of assets from the group, then, are there?
Well,
to satisfy themselves?
I mean, they will have to assure themselves that the consolidated financial accounts present a true and fair view of the worldwide activities of the group. And part of that will be making sure they've picked up the activities in the different and the assets in the different jurisdictions.
Yeah, and so, and I'd like to know, we're talking about 750 million now. Is there a general intention to bring that down over the years? Do we know?
This is an early kind of point of debate in the design of the model rules. It was something that was debated quite hard at the time. So as well as the 15% minimum rate, what should the threshold be? And there were some jurisdictions that wanted a lower threshold, but it was felt that the best way to design these rules was by reference to the existing country-by-country reporting rules for multinational groups. We exchange information about groups, and those. Tom is actually chair of that OECD working party, and their threshold is 750 million. It makes sense that we operate off the same threshold, and you know better than me, Tom, but I don't see that. Who says never? But it's been hotly debated, and it's not coming down anytime soon, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, there are countries that advocate for a reduced threshold and have done since the start, but there isn't a consensus on that. I think the other thing that two other things on that. One is, as you say, Cora, where possible, the OECD, when taking on this very complex project, has tried to construct it in part around existing elements of international rules. And so we have that 750 threshold for CBC. There was a strong logic, I think, for carrying that across into this project. The second thing, which is just worth saying, and not to be underestimated, is just how complex this project has been. I mean, I think that's in some ways evidenced by this session and the discussions we've had. It's a complex topic. It has taken a considerable amount of energy from the OECD Secretariat and the countries supporting that work. And so I think, for now at least, the focus is going to be on implementing the agreed outcomes, not changing the agreed outcomes. And I would expect at least some time to allow these new rules to settle in and to understand their implications and how they work in practice, because it's been no small undertaking to get us to where we've got to.
And can I ask the other way around? Is the threshold likely to go up to allow for inflation, or is it likely just to stay at 750 for a while? Do we know?
I don't know, Cora and Jeremiah, whether there's a provision on that.
That hasn't been tabled.
So fiscal drag will bring more companies into scope.
I mean, we don't underestimate Tom's point that it has been a nightmare getting here, and there's been so much disagreement, which is why we've ended up with a common approach rather than a minimum standard, because there's still disagreement.
I think
so. It would be very, very brave to try and start opening it again, because as much as one member state might want to open one element, another will want to open another one, and it would just turn into chaos again. And there's focus which now needs to turn to Pillar 1, which isn't yet agreed. Sorry, Tom, did you want to say something else?
Well, the other thing is, whenever international tax rules are changed, it introduces a degree of uncertainty for businesses. You know, that's always one of the things that I think, you know, we worry about, because that can have an impact on, you know, businesses making decisions, and then that knocks on, you know, to economic growth. So I think one good reason to maintain the thresholds where they are is that does provide companies with a degree of certainty that they know where they stand on whether they're going to be in scope or not, you know, at the present time. And I do think that's quite important when they're then thinking about how they respond to these new initiatives, because they all need to take advice. There are lots of filing obligations. There's a lot of activity that companies will have to do in order to comply, and they need time in order to be able to prepare for that, which is also one of the reasons why we are keen to be able to give Jersey businesses the certainty by sort of having this legislation through to the timetable we've got. So I don't think that I think changing the parameters at this stage is not something that you can't absolutely rule it out, but I wouldn't say anyone would foresee that. And as I say, I think the focus will be on let's actually get these new rules working. And as I think the Minister said and Cora has said, that probably is going to mean, that will mean an increase in sort of rulings and dispute resolution as countries work out how these new rules work. But that, I think, is the focus over the period ahead, rather than changing the goalposts.
Would it be fair to just to return to the point I was making earlier about the competitiveness or otherwise of our regime, to say that you're walking a bit of a balancing act in that we want to maintain our own new corporate tax rate, the MSIT. We want it to be attractive, but if it became too attractive, it might attract adverse comment. Is that a balancing act you recognise?
We know that the whole it's inevitable, isn't it? And I think Montford was really driving at it in his earlier question about whether I believed in the principles of it. That it ends up where it starts off as a political project. We want to change the tax because of the way tech companies are trading. And somebody else comes along and says, well, we would like to see a minimum global tax. Starts off as a political project. Then it goes to all of our hard-working officials and becomes a very technical project until you've got something on the table, and then it gets political again. So it is trying through a big dose of being a political project to do something which is very technical. So we've been mindful that there is a lot of politics involved in this project, which for us is why we have constantly continued to look to do everything that we're doing, pointing to the model rules, where there's flexibility, using that flexibility carefully and with balance and with rational argument, but always pointing back to the model rules so that anybody can look at it and say,
Minister,
oh yes, it's the model. We can see where the model rules are.
Is the risk? I mean, it's the same question as the chair, but perhaps from a different angle. Is the risk not that actually the genesis of this, you could argue, is for some bigger countries which might be looking at zero tax jurisdictions like ours, but there are lots of others, and saying it's not right that companies are not paying tax, but actually when they do start paying tax, it's the countries with those zero tax rates which are getting the tax revenue. And is there a risk that they'll say actually the philosophy which we started off with at the beginning on question 1B is it's not meeting the desire that they set out to achieve?
Well, you could make that argument. I don't think it's an argument that I really accept, because at some point during this process, the OECD did lots of work saying, oh, well, we think that what happens in Island Z is, there's all of this money being charged at zero, and it really is very bad. And when we get this new regime, they're going to have squillions more tax. And we said to them, that's not how Island Z works. It works like this. This is what we're doing. This is where the tax is being paid. And so we've been quite clear about how Jersey works, transparent about what we're doing, transparent about the base case tax scenario. So if people do make that argument, we can quite clearly say, well, we've said this to you, we've said the other to you. You have created a regime, so the international community has created a regime where a global minimum tax should be applied to profits in the jurisdiction.
I think also,
It's a
Minister,
principle.
Sorry.
So I was going to say, if the principle is, as I've always understood it, the principle is that global companies should be paying tax on their operations where they arise, then it doesn't really matter where the tax is being paid. The whole point is to ensure that tax is paid.
And can I just ask?
I was going to say this exact same point, because it is success for the OECD that countries implement a minimum tax. Yeah. So when we go to the meetings, they are pleased to hear of more countries implementing the minimum tax. So it is where the profits are earned, but one of the policy objectives was to introduce a minimum tax. So Jersey introducing it is.
But is it actually where the profits are earned, or is it where the profits are declared? So companies will pay the tax where the profits are declared, because surely the purpose was to avoid mechanisms to shift profits.
So companies will now be paying tax where their audited financial statements under accepted accounting principles say their profits are earned. Right. So that is, the clearest, I think, baseline that you could have.
And it's back to the point that I was trying to make with my Island Z is, we have not been an area or an island that's had base erosion and profit shifting, which was the implication of your question.
There's still got sort of some practical questions.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think we had a flight of fantasy there, didn't we?
We did.
We can have a few more. We've got a few minutes for those as well, but a few more. But there's.
Yeah. So
it's a sort of practical.
This is to do with the timeline, which you've touched on some of the timeline already. What measures are being taken to ensure that all the necessary systems and processes are in place before the implementation date?
Do you want me to talk about that?
Yeah, because it's.
So there's a lot of work, apart from the legislation work that we're doing, there's a lot of work going on a number of parallel streams at the minute, particularly in Revenue Jersey. We are looking at our IT system that we're going to need to procure a new kind of top class IT system that will be specifically tailored for Pillar 2 businesses. So at the minute we are doing some business process analysis work, which will lead to a tender that will need to then go out for the IT system. So that work is happening. We are going to set up a dedicated Pillar 2 unit within Revenue Jersey. So it will be a unit that will be staffed by officials with different types of accounting and tax experience and dispute experience to look after these Pillar 2 groups. And it will include rulings, and it will include guidance that we are working on, frequently asked questions. So over the coming weeks, I suppose that our next piece of work with the legislation is to really identify the key issues and questions that businesses are asking us and try and consolidate sort of early answers to those and publish them on the website. So there's different strands taking place.
So you mentioned the guidance, and that's one of the questions. And so you'll be issuing detailed guidance to businesses?
Yeah, so guidance is going to be, we will be publishing guidance. It's going to be kind of living, breathing, evolving guidance. We're going to start it early with kind of key immediate questions for people. And then over kind of the coming months, we have worked out kind of tables of contents for this guidance, and we will be putting in our frequently asked questions and constantly modifying it, because we don't want to wait until we finish the guidance to publish anything.
And would you anticipate any kind of workshops or drop-in sessions or slightly more tailored for individual businesses?
Yeah, so we've had, we've spoken to, of our kind of 1,400, roughly 700 groups, we've spoken to a lot of them already, many times. We're setting up a broader guidance working group, which will have advisors and businesses in Jersey to kind of get more involved in some of the practical stuff. So there's quite a few plans on that. We do a number of presentations as well that are coming up.
I was going to say the difference with this and some of our other tax guidance is that this is really aimed at very sophisticated organisations who will have expert advisors, they'll have finance, who'll be dealing with finance professionals. It won't be guidance that has to be tailored for members of the public, because it just won't touch them in small businesses. So it will probably be quite different in nature and presentation simply because of the audience.
It is quite niche. Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the timetable for the revenue arriving in government coffers? Will it dribble in over the year, or will it be a sort of all arrive at the end? And if so, what dates are we talking about? When will we get that visibility as to how much money is arriving?
So part of the difference of this being not 0-10 is that we will have rolling dates for payment and filing, because that's the way the rules work. So that's the way we need to fit in with the global system. So the first visibility on cash payments, the earliest will be accounting periods ending 31 December 2025, and the first payment on account for those will come in at the end of May. It's 5 months after the end of the accounting period, 2026. So we will start to see the cash coming in for December year ends in 2026.
Isn't that around the time of an election?
That'd be for the new chief minister. For the new chief minister to spend.
People come after us will benefit.
Yeah, basically, yes. So it will start in May 26 and then just build up through that year.
That's it, yes, yeah. And then the balance is paid
Presumably
12 months.
year as well.
We may need to reconsider the ring fencing then. So I think every candidate might want to spend that money on something different.
Which is why we should all have mind to what the FPP said earlier this week.
I'm looking at my fellow panel members
Sorry,
and just seeing if there's
only a
anything
couple.
you want to ask.
One small thing you mentioned right all the way through this hearing, the question of flexibility and responsiveness. Now, in legal terms, legislative terms, what are the mechanisms for bringing in any measures we feel necessary as a result of perhaps actions by other jurisdictions?
It's a piece of primary legislation, so if we were going to change it, we would largely need to change it by regulation.
It would be regulation. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, there are areas of guidance where the rules are not black and white, and so we will use that mechanism to try and clarify Jersey's interpretation of some of those rules, and that's where it's important that our interpretation is not out of line with the rules, but works for Jersey.
Okay. And the other question I had here was about the fiscal policy and how the money is going to be used. But already, as far as you dare say, Minister, commit yourself to using it in the way they suggest, I think.
Very quickly. We know that this is very, I was about to say esoteric legislation, but it's fairly niche in a sense. But in another sense, the idea of it is quite simple. Do you envisage being able to communicate a relatively straightforward or a simplified message to people about what this entails? Because I think it's something which is of interest to a wider constituency rather than just the business industry. And for example, some of it would you consider things like infographics, which could be used to explain what things like, TPR and MSIT and all those different interpretations could be in a visual form?
Or whom for the public as a whole?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe for states members, dare I say.
Are you trying to suggest that we haven't done that thus far, Vice Chair?
I'm saying that we've probably had to do that in our heads and get these kind of...
Okay.
Could I maybe clarify? So we did try to do some sort of diagrams, and I know they're still a little bit, it's still a little bit tricky, but is that the type of thing that...
I think so, because I think having tangible examples, and
Right.
they don't have to be Jersey-based, but you say this company is under different models how it would work. So I think almost like a short video where people can just watch it. Would you consider that?
The Cora and Jeremiah show.
Then maybe if people could help.
A YouTube favourite.
It's a fair point, because we have been dealing with the in-scope companies. As the Minister said, they're very sophisticated. They've got their own tax team, some of them probably as big as Revenue Jersey. It will affect the public in those broader ways that we've described in this hearing. It's not going to be straightforward. It's quite challenging, but we'll go away and see if we can amend maybe some of those flow diagrams or pictorials or something.
I would have said that there is not wishing to say, well, don't tell the public things that they don't understand or that are not immediately relevant to them. I think the message for the public is we are introducing a tax that affects the biggest companies in Jersey, and they will pay this tax. I think when we're trying to communicate other things to the public at the same time, I think Richard Summersgill would say it's difficult to tell people things too far in advance and to make it simple for people to
But I also
understand.
know, I'm sure you have your creatives in all your departments, including this one, who visualise. I just think people visualise things in different ways and understand things in different ways. So, and it's potentially it's a lot more exciting than it sounds.
It's a positive message. The message for the public is possibly as simple as we have some companies in Jersey who will now be paying tax, and that's a good thing for the island because it will create money that we can put into our reserves for the future.
But I think everybody in Jersey understands 0-10, at least as a concept. I'm not sure they've yet landed with the idea that it's now 0-10, 15, 20. Our tax system is changing.
Yeah, so we would say it's not 0, 10, 15, 20. We've got 0-10, and we've got the new all shiny MSIT, which is 15.
And so we won't have the 20s we established earlier, the 20s.
There is a bit in the middle, but it's just 20%.
It's just we don't like to talk about it too much.
Under 0-10, utilities, property earnings, and large corporate retailers pay 20.
So let's finish on that then. I don't presume, I'm not the chair, but for me...
Tom is going to need to leave us sharply.
Is there an irony then that you've got some lower companies with a lower turnover paying 20% tax when the higher profit ones are only getting taxed 15? Is there not a strong argument just to bring it all down to 15?
So we remind ourselves that why do countries charge property taxes?
I'm talking about retail.
Okay, but property is there as well, and utilities. Yeah. The reason they charge them higher is frankly that they can't move. It's immovable. Yeah. So that's why they charge higher rates. When it comes to retail, though, we remind ourselves of what the profit threshold actually currently is under the basis of 0-10. It's 500,000 before you start paying any tax. So it's not an ungenerous regime currently. Having said that, we are mindful that we still need to do some thinking and consideration of that large corporate retailer element arising out of this change. And we are doing that.
Good. Well, ministers and officers, thank you very much indeed. I think I often get asked to explain this in a nice, simple, easy way. I'm not sure that we've quite passed that threshold here today, but I hope that that we've at least shed some light on it. And I think we've done a pretty thorough exploration of the principles involved and the key decision points that the government has taken and why those decisions have been taken. So thank you very much indeed for your time, and we can close the meeting at that point.